Hello and welcome to the Third Sector podcast. I'm Emily Harle.
And I'm Lucinda Rouse. And in this bonus episode, we'll be reflecting on a recent interview with Simon Blake, Chief Executive of Stonewall. Emily, you went to meet Simon recently. There's a full write-up of your discussion on the Third Sector website. Why was now a good time to go and meet him?
So Simon took up the chief exec role at Stonewall in 2024. So he's been in post for a wee while now. And since then, he's led the charity through a lot of changes. So this includes the launch of its new strategy last year, a brand refresh and a restructure. So he's been busy. He joined the charity armed with lots of leadership experience in the sector, most recently as the chief executive of Mental Health First Aid England, but also having led the National Union of Students and the sexual health charity Brook. And this was also not his first time at Stonewall. Simon was actually the charity's deputy chair between 2015 and 2021. When he joined, he was under no illusions about the tough environment that he was heading into and the changes that Stonewall had to make to ensure its sustainability for the years ahead.
So let's have a listen then to some of the clips that you've selected from your interview with him. Here's the first one.
It became very clear very quickly, and I knew before I started that we were going to need to address clarity of purpose, resources in the right places, and to ensure that we were able to deliver. Between getting the job and starting, we had change of government. We very quickly then had the situation in the US. So we looked at what we thought Stonewall's role was within the context of the plethora of organisations that now exist. When Stonewall started, there were a handful. Now, it's estimated that it's a couple of thousand LGBTQ plus charities. And so really, what is Stonewall's place in that ecosystem? What is our place in amongst all those other players? And therefore, where can we make the most impact? And then restructured based on that purpose.
So it sounds like quite significant changes needed to be made very soon after Simon took up his post. How extensive was the restructure?
So initial reports, both by ourselves and other players in the media, were that up to half of Stonewall's 114 staff were at risk. But in actuality, Simon has told me that only 44 cuts were made across the board, and that was across 2 financial years. It seems that the charity sort of navigated that turbulence really well. And Simon also did mention a sort of plethora of ways that the charity supported its staff through that, giving them, opportunities to question and ask about decisions that were being made. And he said the really key thing for Stonewall was being super transparent about the reasons behind it and about Stonewall's new direction, which was all shaped off of its new strategy. And when the strategy was being designed, it's at a time when charities across the board are facing really, intense financial pressures. And we'll get into how that specifically affected LGBT charities shortly. But it was also being developed at a time when the rhetoric around LGBT issues, particularly trans rights, is incredibly polarised. Freedoms are being restricted and we're seeing populist movements rising, and we're seeing reports after reports about trans rights and trans lives really being up for debate. So I asked Simon how the strategy responds to that environment that we're seeing.
As a new chief exec, my job was to work out what we needed to do moving forwards. And as I say, to really make sure that we focus on what we believe we could add most value to in the overall ecosystem. So for us, that was parliamentary and influencing, so policy and influencing, which has been right at the heart of Stonewall's work since the beginning. It was about inclusive places, so working in partnership with corporates. Business and public sector has been such a key partner in progress around LGBT rights, because good business relies on having diverse teams and inclusive workplaces. Businesses know that. All the evidence shows that. If you look at Open for Businesses reports, it shows the economic benefits. People need to feel like they belong if they're going to work well. And then sport and inclusion in sport. We know that mental health is a really significant issue. We know that exercise can be a really important factor in improving well-being, but also a sense of belonging. And so we wanted to focus on that as well. And then the third strand of our strategy is around navigating turbulence. And, we talk about a global rollback of rights sometimes, and that can feel like you've got both arms holding walls out as they're closing against you. And there's no doubt, I don't want to, again, underplay what is going on. But turbulence, however bumpy, you can keep moving forward. And our job as leaders is to keep on finding those ways. And it might only be a tiny foot sword. And as we know, progress is always 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's a cha-cha. So what we're saying in the navigating turbulence piece is not just understanding that as an external reality, but that actually we're going to need to do things differently.
I'm sure many charity chief execs are very aware of the feeling that you've got 2 arms out holding the walls as the environment is moving against you. But I thought it was interesting that Simon was, on the whole, fairly positive in his outlook, despite the hostile environment that we're seeing, despite rising populism, all of these challenges that Stonewall is facing and that other charities working in the same space are facing. He was quite positive, I think very glass half full, and in particular about Stonewall's ability to weather the current storms and navigate that turbulent environment and continue to really push in its advocacy and influencing work.
He certainly seems under no illusion that he's got his work cut out for him. But I was also struck by the really positive tone of your interview and of his attitude to confronting these major challenges that are facing Stonewall's service users. I also love the fact that he is still placing an emphasis on working towards a point where Stonewall no longer needs to be in existence. And let's hear a little bit about what he had to say about that.
Ultimately, I'd love for us not to need to exist because we had achieved full equality. I don't think that's going to happen in my lifetime. It's certainly not going to happen with it. But there are so many things that when I first started out 25 years ago, when we were supporting Stonewall around repealing Section 28, equalising the age of consent, none of those things existed. We were at our 25th birthday in Scotland, and one of the founders of Stonewall just looked around the room and he said, "You may feel like it's tough times now, but 25 years ago, we didn't know that all of us existed. We had to look for the community and we had to find it." So I think it's really important to, yes, look forward and to understand where we are now, but also to understand the history, to understand how far we've come, because we need all of that energy and that momentum to understand, however tough things are, we have made change before, we've navigated turbulence before, and we will keep on doing so. And that's what keeps me going.
I think the emphasis on history there is very apt for Stonewall specifically, being an organisation with such a rich history and a history that is about protest and advocacy. And I think in terms of reflecting on progress that has already been made, it's something that in the charity sector, it's very easy to forget to do when you're, working against all of these challenges and, just constantly trying to deliver for your beneficiaries. It can be really difficult to give yourself the time to pause and reflect on how far you've come. And I think it's a really important thing to sort of keep up morale for yourself and also for your staff. Simon's very pragmatic in the way that he approaches these challenges, but he's also, like we discussed, quite positive. And that was also reflected in his response when I asked about the funding outlook for LGBT charities specifically. Now, for context, Third Sector has previously reported that for LGBT charities, funding challenges have been amplified by rollbacks in corporate support. So some organisations that we spoke with largely attributed this to ripple effects from anti-diversity and equalities measures in the US under the Trump administration. This has caused some companies, from what we've heard, to be a bit more risk averse, particularly those who have US interests. But although Simon agreed that funding for LGBT causes was uncertain, he didn't seem to think it was a completely bleak picture. Let's have a listen.
I think this is like everything. There's so many paradoxes, that you can look in one direction and you can say there's less visibility, whether that be in pride, whether that be in the way that people are engaging. You can look in another direction and people are doing all sorts of corporate partnerships, working with their pride networks. Lesbian Visibility Week, there was a market close within London Stock Exchange Group, as there was for Trans History Month, which is the same place that we also launched our strategy last year. Globally, there is no doubt that there is less money within charities, there's less money within LGBT charities. There is no doubt that it is going to be more and more difficult, that everybody is under more scrutiny, as corporates might well also. There are a number we know making their own redundancy programs. Where are they investing in DEI programs? Where are they investing in training more broadly? What charity partnerships are they investing in? But I think we're heading into Pride Month. And so if you look with a glass half full, there is an awful lot of support which is still there. And our job is to mobilize that support, maximize it for the benefit of LGBTQ plus communities, whilst not underplaying the fact that there is also no doubt forces which are working against principles of inclusion and principles of equality.
It's great that you got that interview with Simon just before Pride Month, and very interesting to hear what he has to say about the funding environment for these charities. We have covered several Pride charities, Pride events going under over the past year or so. Did he have anything to say about where Stonewall stands in all of this?
Yes, so I did ask Simon about Stonewall's finances in particular, because we know that their accounts for 2024-25, which were filed prior to the restructure and new strategy, showed that its corporate funding had more than halved in just a year, which is very significant, dropping to just 143,000 thereabouts, and its overall income had dropped by more than 2 million in that same financial period.
And what was their total income?
They recorded a total income of 4.7 million during that period, and that was down from 6.9 million in the previous year. So quite a significant fall. But when I asked Simon about how the finances are looking now, he said that Stonewall has actually entered a surplus. It's still finalising its accounts, so he couldn't share any specifics with me, but I'm sure we'll be keeping an eye on that on the news desk.
And Stonewall is going to be by no means immune to societal polarisation and the effects that that has on both their staff and their service users. It appears that Simon is quite well qualified to be dealing with these concerns. What did he have to say about it?
So yes, as you say, Simon is very well qualified to discuss protecting mental well-being, since he was the Chief Executive of Mental Health First Aid England from 2018 to 2024. And he did acknowledge that times are difficult for our staff working in areas where their cause is highly polarised. So with Stonewall specifically, many of the staff working at the charity, may have personal ties to LGBT issues, and some issues hit closer to home than others. So it's all about protecting each other and making sure you can step in when things get a bit too much. So this is what he had to say on that.
Luckily, I was trained well at Mental Health First Aid England in order to look at and think about staff well-being. We talk a lot about it, and we also talk about the fact that actually, it is a hard job, and it isn't a job that is for everybody. And that sometimes we have to acknowledge that no matter what an organisation does, it feels too close. And that's a really important, psychological contract, which I think you have with your staff and your staff have with you. We have taken all sorts of measures. So we work a 9-day fortnight. We have a very positive annual leave. We've got your usual bits around your employee assistance program. We seek to ensure that we create a culture in which people support one another, that we're all working together. We're constantly looking at ways to reinforce and celebrate progress. We've just, as part of a whole range of organisations, played a really important part in changing the hate crime legislation. That's the first pro-LGBTQ plus legislation in the UK since equal marriage. And so celebrating and marking that as a really special and important moment. We're on the same side. And yes, it's difficult. And sometimes, you need to step in for other people, that there are things which can feel tough because it's closer to home, and also that there are moments where we might be affected by something, and we're alive to all of those issues. But I think what I'm proud of here is that we all know that we're here because we're working for something which is bigger than us. We've all decided that we want to be here because we believe it is a purpose which is really, really important, that until every single person in the community has that opportunity to live safely, to feel equal, to understand that the world is supportive and that they can thrive, then we've still got work to do. And when you've got that fire in your belly, and I think if you ask every single member of staff, they have got that fire in their belly, then that is a protection in itself.
Massive strength, a mission-driven organisation.
Absolutely. And it goes back to celebrating progress as well. And to me, that just underlines that Stonewall is really reinforcing the fact that it is an advocacy first organisation, that is embedded in their strategy, and it's a really key part of what it does. And Simon Blake is no stranger to working with government, lobbying government. He comes armed with expertise in this area. And he has also previously served as the chair of Compact Voice between 2008 and 2015, which many of our listeners may recognise as the predecessor of the Civil Society Covenant of today's government. It was essentially a previous partnership agreement between the government and the sector to sort of bolster their work and really amplify outcomes, but it was criticised by some for lacking teeth. And I thought it was really interesting when I asked Simon about his view on the covenant today. He said that while he agrees the government and civil society should work together, he wasn't sure whether partnership was the right word for that relationship. And he was saying that charities need to consider when is the right time to work with the government and when is the right time to campaign against it and call out places where progress is really lacking. And that links back to Stonewall as an advocacy first organisation. But he did admit that there are several challenges when it comes to carrying out really good, really effective advocacy work. So let's hear what you had to say on that.
One is, it's really hard to fund advocacy. Government doesn't pay you to lobby against it. Yeah, a time when there is less resource around, and it is really, really important. The other is that it isn't straightforward. It's not straightforward in terms of your communication, who's hearing what, when, where, and how. It isn't straightforward when there's so much disparity between different people within parties and across parties and in devolved environments. But also there's a courage issue. And I think that we sometimes self-censor and that isn't helpful. But also the world is increasingly noisy. And sometimes people assume if it's not public and it's not noisy, it isn't happening. And some of the best advocacy, some of the best work that we do is behind closed doors, having private conversations with 1, 2, 3 people. And that's labour intensive. And you also then have to have the trust of people that you are doing that work as well.
And many listeners will be familiar with the sort of labour-intensive nature of really effective advocacy. But I do think the point around not trying to focus on just being the loudest and most public, some of the best advocacy work does happen in those one-to-one conversations with a really in-depth knowledge of parliamentary process and who you need to talk to and how to engage with civil servants. That was another really key element that Simon brought up as well, is just having that understanding, having that knowledge and valuing those relationships, because that's where progress can really be made.
Yeah, really interesting. And I can't wait to hear what Stonewall will be celebrating next as a result of that work that is currently ongoing. We hope you enjoyed hearing about Emily's interview with Simon Blake, and you can read the full write-up of their conversation under the Features tab on the Third Sector website. Simon will also be speaking at Third Sector's annual conference, which is happening later this month. He'll be part of a panel on the 23rd of June, speaking about leading in a hostile media environment. The Third Sector Conference is taking place in London, and we will include a link to find out more in the show notes to this episode. From all of us at Third Sector, thank you so much for listening. This episode was produced by Navpal.